The Democracy Forum is a not-for-profit organisation founded in 2009 under the patronage of Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne. Its principal goal was to work for the furtherance of democracy, peace and the rule of law in order to counter religious fundamentalism and intolerance in our global communities. In an increasingly fractured world, this goal continues to be the driving force behind all of the Forum's activities. Lord Charles Bruce is the current president of the Forum. Since its inception, the Forum has hosted and co-hosted seminars on a wide variety of topics relating to democracy and human rights across the world. The Democracy Forum encourages academics, students, journalists and other socially and politically conscious people to attend our seminars and to participate in the question and answer session. Details are available on our website, thedemocracyforumlimited.com.
The Democracy Forum brings you another not-to-be-missed webinar, Jamaat-e-Islami, Bangladesh, the Sub-Continental Brotherhood. Jamaat-e-Islami has been the most successful Islamic organization within Bangladesh in terms of creating a strong social and political foundation. With branches in more than one country, it has also managed to garner international support. However, while the party remains active in the social landscape of Bangladesh, its long-term future looks in doubt. To consider these and related issues, please join our panel of experts for a rigorous and stimulating discussion, bringing your questions and comments for the panel.
Welcome. I am Humphrey Hawksley, your host for our Democracy Forum debate on an issue which might be pivotal to the future of one of Asia's most successful economies. Bangladesh is central also to America's test to bring democracy to the Indo-Pacific and its rivalry and the struggle with authoritarianism. How much does Jamaat-e-Islami's Bangladesh political ideology go against the secular ideals enshrined in the country's constitution? This is also a conundrum for many other governments around the world, religion and governance, and specifically as Islamic issues are once again focusing geopolitical minds. To discuss Jamaat-e-Islami, Bangladesh, the Sub-Continental Brotherhood, we have an expert panel who will clarify, explain and enlighten. Shafi Mostofa, Mohammed, Sinan, Siyech, Maidul Islam, Mohammed Nazrul Islam. Democracy Forum Chair Barry Gardiner, MP, is following our debate and is deeply knowledgeable about the issues we are discussing. He will sum up at the end. And as always, to give us the canvas and background of our discussion, we go to the President of the Democracy Forum, Lord Charles Bruce. Lord Bruce, the floor is yours.
Welcome to today's webinar, which will examine the circumstances prompting the re-emergence of Jamaat-e-Islami as a democratic movement after a decade of political isolation. In opening the proceedings, I'd like to start by sharing my appreciation for the additional workload which the team at Democracy Forum has assumed since we took a decision to double the output of webinars to twice monthly. Clearly, this will result in a wider and more diverse but more immediate coverage of important topics across Asia, and will allow us to drill down more deeply into relevant issues. I'd like to extend my gratitude to all our panelists today for participating, and my thanks, as always, to Humphrey Hawksley for agreeing to chair the panel. After an absence from frontline politics since 2013, the sight of Jamaat-e-Islami holding a political rally in the center of Dhaka in June this year, albeit within the ambit of the Institution of Engineers, attracting crowds of over 100,000 supporters, appears to signal a revival in its prospects as a political force. Tracing its origins from a meeting in Lahore in 1941, Jamaat was established as a movement pursuing the ideal of Hakimiyya to ensure the incorporation of Islamic ideology into all aspects of state governments. Historically, Jamaat has opposed Bangladeshi nationalism to the extent of colluding with the Pakistan Army during the War of Liberation in 1971 and participating in the ensuing genocide and ethnic violence. Several of its leaders subsequently have been tried and convicted for war crimes. Although widely credited today as Bangladesh's most populous and arguably best organized political movement, Jamaat has not been close to exercising power since 2006, when it participated in the BNP, the Bangladesh National Party-led government. And since the re-election of an Awami League government in 2008, it has been effectively ostracized. The record of Jamaat as a responsible political party and coalition partner serving in the former BNP government is marred by evidence of violence and intimidation. During the 2001 general elections, it was found to be involved in widespread acts of terror and faced allegations of vote rigging. In 2013, the party was condemned for participating in firebombing, typically targeting public transport and police vehicles. More than 400 people, including 20 law enforcement officers, were killed in these attacks. And for the past 15 years, Jamaat has been proscribed as a political actor, forced to defend 14,000 judicial cases. It has been hollowed out by the arrest of over 90,000 party members, and many more have opted to leave Bangladesh and join a growing exodus to Malaysia, the United States, Australia, Canada, and Europe. Furthermore, Jamaat claims that around 240 of its activists have been killed by law enforcement agencies at the behest of the Awami League government. In 2013, the Dhaka High Court ordered the cancellation of its registration as a political party and banned it from contesting elections. Yet, despite these setbacks, a recent police intelligence report estimates that the party's membership has actually tripled since 2008. In the run-up to elections to be held by January the 28th next year, it's widely assumed that the Awami League government has been forced to reprieve Jamaat as a direct result of a change in visa policy announced by the US State Department in May, which intends to rescind access to any Bangladeshi politician or civil servant found interfering with free elections. This order has subsequently been extended to include family members and follows earlier actions by the United States, such as the response to the notorious Rapid Action Battalion in 2006, and the decision not to invite delegates from Bangladesh to any of the democracy summits convened by President Biden in December 2021 and March this year. Interviewed earlier this month about United States foreign policy objectives in South Asia, particularly the need to counter the hegemony of China, Michael Kugelman, director of the South Asia Institute of the Wilson Center, explains, I quote, "The United States seems to have made Bangladesh a test case for its democracy promotion policy overseas." And he added, the threat of United States visa restrictions won't deter Awami League leaders if they're bent on holding on to power at all costs. They would likely be subjected to ferocious campaigns of retributive politics, much like what the ruling party has meted out to the opposition. So clearly, the possibility of Jamaat's return to the political stage, albeit in coalition with other opposition parties, has far-reaching implications for the future of Bangladesh. I hope that our panelists will be able to lead us through the labyrinthine nature of the political landscape and explain what is actually happening. Well, thank you very much for deciding to watch this webinar today. And if you have any questions or comments, please pass them to the panel through the chair.
Thank you, Lord Charles Bruce, for that. And if I could repeat, questions, comments, call us all to account, put your thoughts in the comment box there. Setbacks, but the membership tripled and reshaping the political dynamics of the country. What a labyrinth, as Lord Bruce says. Our first panelist is Shafi Mostofa, Associate Professor of World Religions and Culture at the University of Dhaka and an Adjunct Lecturer at the University of New England in Australia. He is going to outline for us our debate on Jamaat's history, its agenda, its strategy, and its contribution or not to democracy, and how that is going to impact the current political system. Shafi Mostofa, give us your thoughts.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, the Charles rightly pointed out that the Jamaat-e-Islami is the most discussed and controversial political party in the Indian subcontinent due to its conservative outlook and its alleged connections with fundamentalist uprisings in the region. Having said that, the rise of political Islam or Jamaat-e-Islami is interconnected, which is rooted in a complex interplay of historical, socio-economic, and geopolitical factors. Colonial disruptions, Western influence, and the legacy of nationalist failures created the space for Islamist movements to emerge as alternatives in the post-colonial period. An intellectual awakening, economic disparities, and the failure of secular models further fueled the appeal for political Islam, promising social justice, cultural identity. Cold War dynamics, as well as Iranian Revolution in 1979, played pivotal roles in inspiring and strengthening Islamist movements globally. Apart from all these factors, I think the abolition of the Ottoman Caliphate caused the actual rise of political Islam across the Muslim world. With this brief note on the rise of political Islam, I would like to begin a discussion by quoting Professor Nadim's comment on Syed Abulullah Maududi that two most Pakistanis and those associated with various Islamic political outfits in countries like Egypt, Indonesia, Syria, and Malaysia, the Syed Abulullah Maududi is to political Islam what Karl Marx was to the communism. So that said, let me focus a bit on Maududi's early life. Maududi was born on September 25, 1903 in Hyderabad, India, and emerged as one of the most influential Islamist theologians and ideologues of the modern world. And we know all about that his parents came from Afghanistan and they were from a Chishti Sufi order as a renowned Islamist Sufi Torika. And his early education was based on Madrasa Furqaniya in India. Having said that, Maulana Maududi was very fluent in multiple languages, especially English, Arabic, Persian, and Urdu. And that enabled him to delve into the literature of various religious, different literatures. And despite his passions for Islamic theology, despite this, his passion for Islamic theology allowed him to become a revered authority in Islamic studies, covering religion, culture, politics, economics, and society. His first book appeared in 1918. That is, at that time his age was just 15, and he started his career initially as a journalist. He was an editor of weekly magazine Taz, and later he became editor in chief in different journals of Jamaat-e-Ulama Hind. And finally, he became the editor-in-chief of Tarjumal, another journal. And through that journal, actually, he was familiar with the Islamic scholars in India. So, and he was also engaged in Khilafat movement. And we know about the Khilafat movement when Ottoman Khalifa was abolished. So that movement actually they demanded for the restoration of the Khalifa, and he was deeply engaged in that movement. So what we have seen through his editorship of different journals, he invited different Islamic scholars to sit together, and finally he founded the Jamaat-e-Islami in 1941. With this short note on the historical background of Sayyid Abulullah Maududi and the foundation of Jamaat-e-Islami, and then his his ideal and he what he wanted to do actually, that was to establish advocated for a Muslim society, and especially the Islamic society. If we look at Jamaat-e-Islami's stated goal, that is, the Jamaat-e-Islami embraces Islam as a totalitarian ideology that seeks to control every aspect of spiritual and material life of the people. In its constitution, JI categorically mentions Islam is the only complete code of life revealed by Allah. And this code encompasses the whole gamut of human life. It does not only prescribe beliefs, but also the norms of behavior. Its guidance covers all spheres of human activities, both spiritual and material. Jamaat Islami aims to bring about changes in all phases and spheres of human activities on the basis of the guidance revealed by Allah and exemplified by the Prophet Muhammad. So their agenda is very clear, that they want to establish an Islamic society completely guided uh, by the Quran and the Sunnah. And if we want to talk about their strategy, uh, if we divide them into different sections, then definitely we can talk about the hierarchical organizational structure. That is one of their strength. That their organizational structure is very strict, and from top to the bottom they have their well structured organizational structure that give them and I mean, through that structure they control their people. They also attract other people to their ideology. And secondly, the disciplinary training, the kind of training they provide to their members, that is extraordinary. Every member has to go through different phases of their training, reading books, knowledge on religion, culture. These are mandatory for each and every member of the member to become a full member. And the most important one is the ideological indoctrination. And definitely they believe that by engaging in parties like Jamaat Islam, or whatever the other Islamist political parties is, they consider it as part of their religious duty to become a member of these political parties. And most importantly, Jamaat, they engage themselves with a lot of social welfare programs, and through those programs, they try to establish connections with the masses. And also, they have their own strategy to infiltrate into the civil service cadre of the government. They have their own strategy to push their people into different job sectors in the country. And definitely, the funding is one of the most important factor for any political parties, and they received funding from different sources. Every member of that political party, they fund for them, and also they receive fundings from the Middle East and also from the diaspora. Bangladesh is a country, nearly 10 million Bangladeshis are working across the globe. So it's a huge number of people working abroad, and funding also coming from those diaspora community. And and also they're very good at using the social media and other platforms. But I would like to conclude here and conclude my discussion, the first part of my discussion, saying that yes, I'd like to quote Oliver Roy that these political parties, they have uh, they're not talking about Islamic nationalism. They're talking about democracy. They have accepted democracy as part of their democratic practices. Instead of Islamic society, they're talking about civil society. So to some extent, they're also contributing to the democratic practices. They're still working within that framework, and they're contributing to the Bangladesh's democracy. I think rest of the thing we can discuss when it comes to the direct question, I think.
Thank you, Shafi Mostofa, very much for that. Could I just try to encapsulate your thoughts of what this political movement is at the moment? Because you talk about the totalitarian ideology, which immediately our mind goes to Afghanistan, the Taliban, Iran, Saudi Arabia, perhaps even Egypt after the Arab Spring and that sort of thing. Is this an electoral winner? Or what is their message that you alluded to there? What exactly is their message of who they are?
I mean, I said by totalitarian, it looks very totalitarian, but this is a fault line. We all the time consider all the Islamist political parties as a monolithic one. Never ever two Islamist political parties is the same one. Neither even the Islam is not monolithic. Even the political parties are not monolithic. So definitely there is a difference in their understanding of the democracy. So I'd like to say in terms of what Oliver Roy says, they have still working within the framework of democracy. They are still
But
participating.
how do they resonate at the grassroots? That's what if you're in a Bangladesh village trying to get a roof over your head or a living and that sort of thing, how does this message resonate against that of the Awami League and other more secular parties?
How it goes against those secular parties?
No. How does that message come down? So if you hear a Jamaat message, do you warm to that as against an Awami League message?
No, it does not necessarily go against the Awami League's message, but I think the situation here in Bangladesh, in terms of when you're considering Jamaat and Awami League, you're placing them side by side. But the issue is not what they're talking, what and to what extent they're talking about Islam. The issue is the Jamaat's contribution in the liberation war. So
can I just comment, because we have a question from Amit Rama, and if you could do that. Why has Jamaat changed its rhetoric on the 1971 war? What was the rhetoric and what is the rhetoric now?
Okay. Definitely Jamaat, this is a very controversial area.
You can be a little controversial. It's a democracy forum debate. Go for it.
Yes. So definitely Jamaat as a political party, they they did not. It's not the new for Jamaat. In 1947, when Maududi was Amir, it challenged the divide between the Pakistan. It did not accepted the division within the Muslim Ummah. That was Maududi's argument. He was against the division of India and Pakistan. And by the same token, I think Jamaat as a political party in 1971, they were against that division within the Pakistan, and purely based on their own understanding of their geopolitical understanding of that time, and also based on their own religious belief.
And now they completely accept it, do they? They accept what's happened. They don't want a revision.
Yes. This is the scenario that this is for the first time, maybe in the history of Jamaat, that Jamaat also seen the split within it. the young populations. You were living in a country, but your party did not recognize your independence war. So actually, um, and within the Jamaat, now it's not all the work criminals. The young generations, they are with them. So they demanded from within the party. They demanded a kind of confession, or to seeking the forgiveness, what was their
Okay.
position in 1971. But still, I think Jamaat is holding very much their own rhetoric that was in 1971. But that is why there is a split as already happened in the party, that they want to see Jamaat as a more nationalist party that actually look for Bangladesh's success and Bangladesh's growth. Yes,
Thank
definitely
you.
that debate is within the party as well. It's not outsiders within the party. They want a different sort of rhetoric. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for clarifying that for us. And we're going to move on now to Mohammed Sinan Siyech, Islamic and Middle East Studies program, the University of Edinburgh, and also a senior analyst at the International Centre for Political Violence and Terrorism. He is a specialist in insurgency and terrorism. So, Mohammed Sinan Siyech, should we be afraid? Over to you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much, Humphrey. I think there are a couple of things that I want to talk about in this discussion over here, right? Number one is I wanted to touch a little bit upon the transnational linkages of Jamaat-e-Islam, which at this point, honestly, is a bit unclear. And the second thing is also I want to talk about a little bit more onto the discussion of like maybe building on what Shafi has talked about, which is about the organization of Jamaat-e-Islam in Bangladesh, right? I think it's interesting to realize that even though there were, the Jamaat Islam originated in in India in the 1940s, and Maududi, like Shafi pointed out, Maududi was of the opinion that India and Pakistan should not be divided, right? One of his main reasonings back then was that essentially the Muslim population in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh will at some point grow to become much more substantial, and it's not a good idea to be able to be dividing them right now in the 1940s, right? And I mean, you look into his argument and then you think about what is the current population of these nations, you realize that there is around 600,000 Muslims all across India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And to some extent, his argument did make sense for whatever he was thinking of, right? In terms of violence, and again, I think there's always an important distinction to make between political violence and terrorism, terrorism, right, per se. Because, for example, the Jamaat Islam in Bangladesh has been very clear and categoric about not, coordinating or trying to support anything along the lines of what other terrorist groups have done, like for example, Ansarullah Bangla team and some of the other groups that are there in in Bangladesh, right? However, in terms of political violence, as we've seen in the last few weeks, we've noticed whatever has been happening. There have been rallies, and when you have a mobilizing force, which is so huge, which goes up in the tens of thousands, right? And depending on any actor that is involved, any political actor that's involved, be the Jamaat Islam, be it the BNP, or for that matter, at some point the Awami League as well. There's always scope and opportunity for these activities to, for some of the border activities to go out of control at some points, right? And we've seen that in the recent violent events as well. However, to then say to what extent is this sanctioned by the Jamaat-e-Islam, that is a question that needs to be investigated further, and that is not something immediately that we can comment on based on whatever has been, put out by the leaders who have tried to take, as even when Shafi discussed, even when it comes to the liberation war and the rhetoric and narratives around that, they have tried kind of changed the way that they've looked at it. And I think this is an important aspect to consider about how about the idea of how political circumstances do affect any organization, and especially Islamist ones. I'll give you an example by what I mean by that. You look at Jamaat-e-Islam in India and you compare that, and I think Dr. Maidul Islam has written quite significantly about this. But you look at about how Jamaat-e-Islam in India worked and how Jamaat-e-Islam in Bangladesh has worked, and you notice that, for example, in India, even though they initially boycotted the ideas of election and of voting, and they didn't like the idea of, or they didn't agree with the idea of secularism in India, over time, by the 1970s, 1980s, they did move their rhetoric a little bit, and I mean they moved their position quite significantly to a point where they say that, oh no, we now engage with it. We think that secularism in India is something that's very beneficial for interreligious harmony, and that was purely based on their experience of participating politically in India, right? Now, given this, and one would think, why is it that an organization which literally started its whole reason of existence was pretty much about opposing secularism and forming an Islamic government, so to say, why is it that this government has now changed, right? And of course, that is then dependent on the political scenario that exists in India, which is why it's also interesting to see that the Bangladeshi Jamaat-e-Islam has, depending on the political scenario, has worked both with the Awami League and with the BNP in different national or state or even regional by-elections and so on within Bangladesh, right? So again, and that's the interesting thing. As observers of political organizations in Bangladesh and in South Asia, we need to be taking a very we need to be taking a very strategic approach to understanding these organizations and to understanding how they themselves align politically with different groups and parties, right? The second thing that I want to talk about quickly is essentially about how they survived despite the fact that in 2013 there was a proscription. Now, politically, they were proscribed, but their student organizations, like for example, the Bangladesh Chhatra Shibir, the student organization that pretty much existed in all the universities, they continued to work. Of course, with a lot of scrutiny, of course, with a lot of fear of government repression of, if any, against their activities. But still, it's what's interesting, and what Shafi pointed out as well, is that they are among the most organized forces in Bangladesh. Now, when you have a situation where you like where social infrastructure is not completely provided, and this is a common problem in in a lot of nations in South Asia, where social infrastructure is not completely provided by the government, you do have NGOs and non-government organizations essentially stepping in to provide such sort of social infrastructure, right? So, for example, with the Jamaat-e-Islam, they have been involved with a lot of different initiatives, whether it comes to, for example, giving microfinance loans, whether it comes to even setting up universities, coaching centers in Bangladesh, which has helped significantly expand their outreach. In fact, as Shafi pointed out, their membership almost tripled since 2008, which means that even at a time when politically they were not active and they were proscribed, they've still been growing quite significantly. As some researchers have pointed out, they also have a lot of different resources, and it's not just the Middle East, but also locally within Bangladesh, they have resources running to a point where some of the academic commentators on this pointed out that their growth rate, for example, they had close to 300 million in terms of different US dollars, that is, in terms of different infrastructure projects, in terms of different, their self-sustainable campaigns, right? And this was growing at a rate of 9%, which was actually faster in the 2010s than the Bangladeshi, growth of rate itself, right? Economic growth of rate, which is at around 6% or so approximately. So there is, and so you have already a foundation set up for a lot of their social infrastructure projects. And then you have the fact that when they were politically banned, then they focused mainly on doing a lot more social welfare programs, a lot more of Islamic missionary programs, so to say. And this is a very powerful, it's a very powerful mobilizing force in any nation, right? Because NGOs, with or without, unintentionally or not, they are very powerful in terms of being political actors down the line if they want to be, right? So this is how they generally survived. Of course, it was still very difficult for a lot of them to engage with government, for example, like try to get into the government services, because there was a lot of intelligent background checks conducted on people who joined the Bangladeshi government, and to see whether they had any linkages with the Jamaat-e-Islam. Of course, maybe there are still a few who may have engaged in or who may have entered, but the numbers were quite restricted because of all of these factors. So in essence, and I pretty much want to conclude the discussion over here. In essence, there are three things that needs to be kept in mind. Number one is that transnationally, there have been, the linkages as far as the scholarship goes, there isn't much that goes on, and politically situations can change the way an organization approaches different issues, including violence. So in the case of Bangladesh, we need to be very careful in distinguishing between political violence, that occurs on the streets during political rallies versus what is extremist or terrorist, violence as well. And also that the Jamaat-e-Islam has had significant foundations of social infrastructure, which is what they built up on, and that is how they almost survived their long period of proscription over time. And of course, with other aspects like their discussions of them lobbying within the United States to lift the ban on their participation as a political actor. I mean, these are other aspects that we can talk about perhaps in the question and answer session. So I'd like to end with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much there. There's a couple of questions that have come in that you've answered already, but I'm going to put them to you again so that you can expand on your answer to them. But before that, when you talk about Jamaat being, as an NGO, filling in these gaps, this is very similar to, say, what Hezbollah does in southern Lebanon, what the Taliban did in Afghanistan. So whether the government doesn't go, they go and spread this message we were talking about. Is that correct? So when I asked earlier about what is the message comes in that they are putting roofs over people's heads and delivering food and microfinancing and that sort of thing.
So there definitely is that part of their outreach as well. But of course, as Shafi pointed out, there are also educational, educational outputs that they engage with as well, right? So, for example, you have universities like Manaratul International University, International Islamic University of Chittagong. All of these have had to some extent, I believe, linkages. And the other panelists can correct me if I'm wrong on this. But essentially, there have been that emphasis on education as well. We need to realize that the Jamaat-e-Islam, and I've spoken, at least in India, I've engaged with a lot of Jamaat-e-Islami members, and as far as I've heard, it's very similar in other parts of South Asia as well. The Jamaat-e-Islam is very education oriented as well. I mean, apart from just doing social work and things like that, like their members would probably be among the most literate members that you would engage with over time, right? So it's two things: one, the educational outreach, and second, the aspect of trying to engage in welfare activities over time. And that's a very common part of Jamaat-e-Islam in all parts of South Asia.
That's interesting. The question from Ritesh S. Niam: Are any outside state or non-state agencies contributing to political Islam in Bangladesh?
The aspect of political Islam, and this is obviously, I mean, inherently, political Islam as a project is transnational. It is not limited to one country alone. Of course, it has its own different versions and it has its own different, manifestations of it in different nations, right? So, for example, Jamaat-e-Islam was in the 70s, 80s, it was supported by the Rabit al-Islam al-Alami, which is the World Muslim League, right? Which was an organization that was set up in, I believe, in Riyadh in 1974. They were engaged in essentially, pushing out a lot of educational, content regarding Islamic activities. And back then, it was done to counter pan-Arab nationalism in the 1970s, which was from Jamal Abdel Nasser and so on. But it became its own, institution over time, and the narratives that came about have developed their own political Islamic, narratives. Now, the interesting thing is that when I was talking to, for example, a few members of the Jamaat-e-Islam in India, I asked them, like, so is there, for example, coordination between the four branches of the Jamaat-e-Islam? It is quite clear that at least the Indian Jamaat-e-Islam has tried to distance itself as much as possible from the other Jamaat-e-Islam branches, especially like the Pakistani, Bangladeshi ones, because of government scrutiny, because of the fact that they look very differently at political Islam now compared to these other organizations. But I would also assume that the Jamaat-e-Islam Bangladesh and definitely Jamaat-e-Islam Pakistan, for example, has had a lot of impact even in the UK as well as in the US. in terms of how it's engaged with different organizations. So I think here in the UK, you've had the Islamic Foundation in Leicester, you've had Muslim Association of Britain, not in a negative way, but definitely there has been this discussion of Muslim Brotherhood and the Jamaat-e-Islam and a lot of their senior leaders engaging with a lot of different activities. To what extent, and this is something I'm unclear about, to what extent are Jamaat-e-Islam Bangladeshi leaders also associated with these transnational connections? That's something I'm not completely clear about, but maybe the others can.
Can I put Mohammed Ismail has asked this question. You have answered it, but just encapsulate it for us. How has Jamaat-e-Islami become so resilient since being banned by the Awami League government?
Their foundation has been pretty significant, and it has been over decades. This is not something that, this is not a new organization. It's in the 1970s that it was formed. So they did have a lot of outreach in terms of education, in terms of institutions, in terms of its economic growth itself. According to some others, there have more than 250 to 300 million is the amount of resources that they have, controlled over time through their different activities, right? And their growth rate, as I said, was faster than even the Bangladeshi government at some point, at almost 9% a year. So given that they already had a foundation, when they were banned as a political actor, they focused more on social welfare activities and more on educational outreach. So that is something that kept the momentum going, so that later on, at a time when it was required, and you can see that right now, they're still mobilizing quite significantly.
So you can't just sort of shut them down by political decree and then that they will go away. Thank you so much for that. Stay with us because our debate is developing, and our next panelist is Maidul Islam, Assistant Professor of Political Science, the Center for Studies in Social Sciences in Calcutta, from where he is at the moment. And he is going to assess the influence of Jamaat-e-Islami on contemporary Bangladeshi politics. Does it have any real potential, and how will it, or could it, make a mark? Maidul Islam, tell us what you know.
Thank you very much, Huxley. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm also thankful to Lord Bruce and other members of the panelists, and also the audience. So one is what we need to understand, that the Jamaat-e-Islami, just like Shafi was pointing out, has a kind of a very organized discipline structure, and it's very much similar to what you call the communist kind of a structure. They have a three-tier organizational structure. So you have, at the bottom, you have the Muttafiq, which is called the supporter. Then you have the Karkun, which is the worker, and at the top you have the Rukun, which is the member. So the most disciplined cadre-based organization throughout the South Asia. Now, first of all, I would also like to apologize because I'm talking in the context of the Diwali. So if you overhear some crackers going on in my neighborhood or some Bollywood songs, so please excuse me. Also, today is Nehru's birthday, which is like a visionary secular democrat, and Jamaat-e-Islami is actually in contrast to this whole Nehruian kind of a vision. Who didn't quite support the secular democracy or secular nationalist kind of a project. In fact, they quite participated in the mayhem against the Bangladeshi Liberation War veterans in 1971. And they quite supported the Islamic militias called the Al-Shams or Al-Badr, who were very much instrumental in decimating very secular intelligentsia in Bangladesh in 1971, which they also carried this burden. We had a discussion before with Shafi also on this point. We can come later on. But if you look at the ideological similarity between the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and particularly in Middle East, then there is a lot of ideological similarity, because one thing you have to be clear, that the Jamaat-e-Islami is not an extremist Islamist organization. It's what we can call a moderate Islamist organization. They don't take up arms in that sense. So they are not like the Taliban, or they're not like the Al-Qaeda, or they're not like the Islamic State. But much like the Muslim Brotherhood, they take part in the electoral process. But at the same time, they have a very difficult relationship with a secular nationalist kind of a government. And if there is a secular nationalist government, they sometimes faces banning, or they sometimes faces outlaw, or they sometimes faces repression. Now, what in terms of the real assessment of Jamaat, and I think a lot of political commentators and political analysts have gone wrong in terms of really assessing the prospects, the strengths, and the weaknesses of the Jamaat-e-Islami in Bangladesh. Now, if you look at the electoral prospects of the Jamaat, then I think the best performance of the Jamaat-e-Islami in the entire history of Bangladesh so far was the 1991 elections. They got something around 12.13% of votes, which is their highest they have ever got in any Bangladeshi elections. But they only contested in 222 seats. The Bangladesh parliament consists of 300 seats. And this is far better than, let's say, 1979 elections, when the Islamic Democratic League, so it was not the Jamaat-e-Islami at that time, but Islamic Democratic League, they got around 10% votes. Now, if you look at then in the 86 elections, when they were party with the Ershad government, they were kind of support. They got the support from the Ershad government. But soon they were out of this entire Ershad regime, and this anti-Ershad agitations that they conducted, that they reaped huge benefits in 1991. But their actual electoral crisis started from 96 onwards. So 96, they although they participated in 300, they contested 300 seats, they actually got down to a little over 8.5% votes. And then later in 2001, although they got 17 seats, which is a kind of a good result in that sense, and they become a part of the BNP government, they got around 4.28% votes. And in 2000,
I think we might have lost our panelist, and he was actually making some very good points there about the nature of Jamaat, of how it wins elections and the numbers there. Are you there, Maidul Islam, at all? Or what we're going to do then is we're going to move on to Mohammed Nazrul Islam, who is our final panelist, and we will come back to Maidul Islam if we can get him back. Mohammed Nazrul Islam is professor of political.
I think there's
are you back with us again?
So one was there a technical fault, or
there was a technical fault. We lost you for about a minute. Yes, but carry on.
Okay, fine. Yeah. So in 2013, although their electoral registration got revoked, and in 2014 they boycotted the elections, in January 2014 elections. In 2014, February, March, the local elections, they participated, and they became the third largest party. So that's quite interesting. And then, of course, in 2019, they were again not part of any elections because they were banned. But as Sinan was trying to pointing out that in the last 10 years, particularly from 2010 onwards, there has been a threefold increase in the membership. So which was around 25,000 in the 2010, and then there is in something around over 75,000. Now we don't know what is we don't know. We can't verify these sources. But this is something which is being claimed, and in one of the articles on the recent Jamaat, it actually cited this particular number. I don't know where the number comes from, but largely because they are not part of the larger electoral agenda, but then largely part of the social kind of an agenda, it is possible that their membership has been increased. And there is also a political economy of fundamentalism which is also going on, because that's what someone, a scholar like Abul Barkat, has done this work, that they have huge investments in the sectors of real estate, transport, education, particularly colleges and universities, and the biggest revenue is actually the Islamic Bank. So where they actually get a lot of money, and there's Islamic Bank has a very transnational network which actually feeds the organization. Now, in terms of the prospect of the Jamaat in the next election. So two questions are very important. One is that the Jamaat has been already split in 20.
We have lost our panelist again. Raj Patel has asked a question here, which I think is what Maidul Islam was just talking about, is will the resurgence of Jamaat-e-Islami in Bangladesh impede the country's progress or even send it in a backward direction? Did I hear you then, Maidul? Are you there?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
good.
yeah, yes, yes.
We lost you again. Instead of, I just wondered if did you hear that question, which I think was what you were about to be talking about.
I can see the question, with the resurgence of Jamaat-e-Islami in Bangladesh impede the country's progress or even send it a backward direction. Yes, I see the question. Yes.
Yes, good. And I think you were about to talk about that. So just carry on with that question.
So yeah, so one is that, of course, the propaganda that they do and the kind of ideological positions that they have, I don't think that it is, if they ever become part of the government in the next few years, let's say, I'm just hypothetical, although it's quite questionable whether they will be part of any government or not. But I don't think that it will be a very progressive kind of a Bangladesh that we will see. So their ideology is quite, in a lot of sense, their ideology is not very regressive. Their positions against a woman, particularly, they think that the woman cannot become the head of the state. So in that sense, but it's quite ironical that they were in alliance with the BNP, who has an woman head as a head of the state. So that's quite ironical. But as far as the prospect of the Jamaat in the next election is concerned, there are two things that I was talking. One is that they are already split in 2020 on the question of their position on Bangladesh Liberation War. So the Amar Bangladesh, which is AB party, which is, if you translate the Bengali into English, which is My Bangladesh Party, which had a kind of headed by former Chhatra Shibir President Mujibur Rahman Manju and some other senior Jamaat leaders. So that is one, is that kind of a problem is there in the Bangladesh Jamaat itself, that the organization is itself split. Now, the position in the Bangladesh Liberation War, which Shafi was also pointing out, they actually changed. And when I was interviewing them, the Bangladesh top leadership, when a lot of them were still there, were alive, not executed, someone like Ghulam Azam or Mohammed Kamruzaman, and I was talking to them, and they were saying that we could actually think about changing our position from the 1971, because we were quite alarmed by the aggression of Hindu India. So that's why we sided with Pakistan. But now the context has changed. And now, look at our rhetoric. We are no more saying Jamaat-e-Islami Bangladesh, but we are saying Bangladesh Jamaat-e-Islami. So the Bangladesh, the term Bangladesh, the country's name is now before our organizational name. So this is something which a tactical change is going on. But as far as the fundamental position on 71 Bangladesh war, I think that has not changed yet. Although the rhetoric has become more milder, but it has not changed yet. And the second thing is that whether they are going to contest the next elections if there is no caretaker government. So that's a very important thing, because the demand for the caretaker government is the demand in the last few elections, whether it's 2014 or 2019, and these elections too. And the third is that if they are going to contest, even if there are no caretaker government, whether they are going to contest in any other name, just like the 79 election, in the Islamic Democratic League was the face of Jamaat. So whether something like the Bangladesh Democratic Party, this is all in the air, whether they can actually be participating with a different name. This has happened with Indian Jamaat. So let's say the Welfare Party of India is the proper face of the Jamaat-e-Islami in India. So why not they actually drop the Jamaat-e-Islami and actually takes a little bit of secular name in terms of the Bangladesh Democratic Party. Something like that. In the Turkish case, the AKP is something like a kind of a face of the Islamists there. And so I think that's the kind of a situation that we are going to see in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I give you a question that's come in from Prashant Kumar? It's, I guess, a yes or no answer. How fair is it to describe Jamaat-e-Islami as a proxy of Pakistan and a puppet of the ISI?
I think it's quite fair. They have a working relationship with the ISI in Pakistan, and there are reports that they get kind of both, ideological as well as logistical support and funding from the ISI.
Okay, and then could I put again to you Raj Patel's question, because the connection made it a little difficult. Will the resurgence of Jamaat in Bangladesh impede the country's progress or send it in a backward direction?
You will send it in a backward direction, absolutely. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, and do you agree then with Shafi Mostofa that this is a totalitarian political movement?
It is a totalitarian political movement, but the interesting thing is that a lot of this much more smarter, that a lot of right-wing parties which also participate in electoral democracy. So they use electoral democracy to propagate their totalitarian ideology.
Okay, thank you very much for that, and for your stamina in bearing with the connection. Stay with us. We are now going to our final panelist, Mohammed Nazrul Islam, Professor of Political Studies at the Shahjalal University of Science and Technology in Bangladesh. He's going to expand on this concept that we've been talking about of Jamaat and democracy. It's that complex intersection of global politics and local dynamics, particularly in relation to this powerful political movement. Can it peacefully coexist with rival political parties in Bangladesh? Give us your view, Mohammed Nazrul Islam.
Yes, good evening from Bangladesh. Thank you, Hawksley.
Thank you.
Perhaps you are hearing me, right? Yeah. Okay. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to the TDF and particularly the office bearers, President Lord Bruce and Chair, and distinguished panelists, dear audience. I would briefly discuss on the opportunities for the reconciliation between Jamaat-e-Islami's political ideology and democracy. And here, yes, to reply to your question, I would say yes. There are many opportunities of the reconciliation of the peaceful coexistence between the Jamaat-e-Islami and other secular, semi-secular political parties. At the outset, I would like to make it clear that I would brand Jamaat-e-Islami as an Islamist democratic political party. And to understand the ideology of democracy of Jamaat, we will have to go back to the formation of Jamaat in 1941 by Maulana Maududi. One point is missing, that Maulana Maududi formed Jamaat-e-Islami in 1941 in the context of the British colonialism in India. Why did he form Jamaat-e-Islami? Because there are other political parties and even who represented Muslim interests. So, for example, Muslim League. So why did Maulana Maududi opted for forming another political party? Here is the question. And we have to understand that Maududi's ideas were not only shaped by his understanding of Islam and Islamic politics, he was also influenced by the idea of the anti-colonial, anti-British movement. So Maududi cannot be fully studied without his understanding or without his stance against anti-colonialism. So that's why the panelists have rightly said that Maududi didn't want to divide India. And here again, there is a confusion. I think we cannot say very easily that Maududi didn't want Pakistan, or he didn't support two-nation theory. I should say the interesting thing is that Maududi wanted a national homeland for Muslims and decolonization of India. Again, he didn't want that the so-called created Pakistan would be ruled by the secular forces like Muslim League or the leaders of Muslim League, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, because Maududi didn't consider that Muslim League and Muslim League leaders were Islamic. Because, the fact is that Maududi's vision was that India would be separated, Pakistan would be created, yes, but that Pakistan would be ruled according to Islamic political philosophy. So Maududi wanted to establish a quote-unquote an Islamic state. When Maududi understood that that Islamic state would not be possible or would not come into existence in the hands of his understanding of secular forces like Muhammad Ali Jinnah or other leaders of Muslim League. So that's why Maududi was a little extremist at that time. And when we study Maududi, we see that in his earlier stage, I mean 1940s or even 1950s, after the creation of Pakistan, Maududi was totally opposite to the idea of Western liberal democracy and human rights. But later on, even Maududi, there is a shift within Maududi. Later on, particularly if we look at his book, The Political Islam, his book, Political Theory of Islam, something like this. And he said, yes, there is reconciliation of Maududi. Even he also suggested for a kind of mixture between democracy and Islam. He said theodemocracy or Islamic democracy. So Maududi was not anti-democratic. My understanding of Maududi, he was democratic, particularly in his later stage. He advocated for democracy, and that democracy shouldn't be identical, according to Maududi, with the Western notion of democracy. He advocated for a kind of Islamic democracy. This is point one. And second is what Jamaat-e-Islami is bearing as a political party and an Islamic movement. The philosophy of political is what we call political Islam or Islamism. And you all know that political Islam is something, or Islamism is something, mixture or amalgamation between Islam and politics. And Islam and politics, or religion and politics are always natural allies in the Islamic society. So many wars, many thinking we are now seeing. Now come to Jamaat-e-Islami. What about the position of Jamaat-e-Islami on democracy? I would say that Jamaat-e-Islami is purely an Islamic democratic political party, because as Shafi Mostofa, Dr. Shafi has correctly said that Islam is not monolithic. Even democracy is not monolithic, so as to Jamaat-e-Islami's understanding of political Islam. So political Islam is also not monolithic. So here, what Jamaat adheres to the idea of political Islam is very much adjustable with Western notion of democracy. And I would here argue that Islam and democracy are not necessarily incompatible. And Jamaat is a very, though not secular, but Jamaat is very liberal political party. And from the very beginning of its birth, Jamaat has resorted to democracy, democratic competition, constitutionalism, and electoral democracy. In Bangladesh, we see the emergence of Jamaat-e-Islami in the 1950s. So, for example, Jamaat didn't take part in 1954 East Pakistan Provincial Assembly. But later on, when there was the military intervention in politics in Pakistan particularly in 1958 by General Ayub Khan, Jamaat-e-Islami, along with all other democratic political parties, waged political movement and tried to restore democracy. There were many alliances during those times in 1950s, 1960s, particularly in 1960s, and Jamaat was a major partner of those political alliances. And during the Liberation War, Jamaat took the side of the Pakistani military, and Jamaat's idea was that they felt that dividing Pakistan would not be beneficial for the Bangladeshi people. That was their political ideology, though they always categorically claim that they didn't do any crimes, what is called war crimes. They were just politically opposed to the Liberation War, and they thought that if Bangladesh is divided, Bangladesh gets independence, and Pakistan is disintegrated with the help of India. Jamaat's fear was that with the Indian help, Bangladesh would be quote unquote subservient state of India and would be dependent on India. So Jamaat was in fear of that, hypothesis, and that's why Jamaat argued that it didn't take part in the Liberation War as because of India. Again, the then world context, the Cold War period, because Soviet Union at that time supported the Liberation War fighters, we call Mukti Jodha. So Jamaat also thought that as Soviet Union believes in socialism and communism, so if Bangladesh are at liberty, then Bangladesh will fall into the the sphere of socialism or communism. So that's why Jamaat is a right-wing political party, and Jamaat understood that they understood that disintegration of Pakistan was better. After independence, Jamaat was banned. Jamaat re-emerged in 1970s, and since then, Jamaat-e-Islami participated in all the elections except few. I mean, major elections: 1979, 1986, and then 1991, 1996, and again, 2008. The Jamaat registration of Jamaat was banned in 2013. Still, Jamaat made alliances with, you can say, secular political parties. So, for example, BNP. So Jamaat believes in constitutionalism. Jamaat believes in democracy. And yes, there are problems within Jamaat. That, so for example, the leadership, I shouldn't say crisis, but leadership weaknesses. Jamaat is struggling because within the circle of Jamaat, there is a growing concern of, or growing interest for reformation within the party. And again, the 71 backlash, there is also the discussion within the circle of Jamaat, though as it is a very, very, bureaucratic, cadre-based political party, this discussion hardly comes out. But the discussion is still going on, that whether we should acknowledge our mistake in 1971, then we sided with the Pakistani army. But Jamaat hasn't expressed that or acknowledged that fact in public. I'm concluding by saying that Jamaat-e-Islami is the most misunderstood political party in Bangladesh. We always say the politics of Jamaat, but we hardly say that politics with Jamaat. Other political parties, actually, they also do politics with Jamaat. So Jamaat is not a terrorist organization, and I should say that this is a political propaganda and misrepresentation. Sometimes even scholars fall prey to this misrepresentation because of their political vendetta or political opposition. Jamaat is a liberal political party, and particularly recently in the leadership of Jamaat coming from the Islamic Chhatra Shibir, they are very liberal and they have Western understanding. Particularly, they have. I understand. I interviewed a few leaders, and I saw that they have the idea of Western liberal political philosophy. They have read Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Bentham, Mill, David Hume, and other writings of European Enlightenment scholars.
Okay, thank you.
So I would argue that Jamaat and democracy go together, and the repression and suppression of the politics of Jamaat will not bring any positive things. Rather, it is very likely that if repression and suppression of Jamaat, whether it is political or any other things, it will produce the radicalization and some adherents of Jamaat, maybe radicals, in the face of this repression and suppression. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I just wanted you to clarify one thing for me, just in a nutshell, if you can. What is the difference between Western democracy and Islamic democracy?
I think I have had a research on democracy and Islam, and it is available online. Islam and Democracy: Conflicts and Congruence, which was published by.
But if you could give us your own view, because you mentioned
view
this
is that Islam. Thank you so much. My view is that Islam is not democracy and democracy is not Islam. Islam is a religion, and most of the followers of Islam, they argue that Islam is a complete code of life, where politics is one aspect of life. And I see that the elements of Western democracy or democracy, liberal democracy, are very inherent in Islamic ideology. Say for example, that
so just in purely practical terms, they are the same in your view, in the way that a government is held accountable, in the way that there's freedom of expression and freedom of speech. They're the same.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's.
But there is But there is just a few minutes. The only problem between Islam and democracy is about sovereignty, but still it is negotiable. It is negotiable.
Okay, that's a technicality. I just want to get the broad brush idea, and I want to ask you one question that's caused a bit of just debate in the comments. Very quick answer: is Jamaat a proxy of Pakistan and a puppet of the ISI?
I have a disagreement with my previous distinguished panelists. I think what I came to learn about Jamaat, and I have had my research. No.
Okay, that's fine. And I'm going to go back around the panel now, asking a question that came in from the audience, which I think was encapsulated what we're trying to say. Will the resurgence of Jamaat, or would the resurgence of Jamaat in Bangladesh impede the country's progress or send it in a backward direction? Can I come to you first, and then we're going to go back around the panel. So Mohammed, Nazrul, Islam, a good thing or a bad thing, the resurgence?
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much. Yes, I would say that Jamaat is not a regressive party. Jamaat is not a regressive party, and over the last few decades, particularly over the last 10 to 20 years, Jamaat is a progressive party, and Jamaat has the capability to coexist with other political parties, even with their distinct ideological orientation, or you say philosophy.
Okay.
I think it's. I do not agree with this statement that if Jamaat comes to power, a state will go to the backward direction.
All right. Thank you for that.
I don't think so.
So your view is
rather Jamaat has many opportunities to contribute to the nation.
Yeah, it's a positive movement. Okay. Maidul Islam, could you give us your view on that? A good thing or a bad thing?
I think, it's a very complicated question. So first of all, the straight answer is if the Jamaat rises, to a certain extent, but it will only rise if what the Jamaat leaders was telling me in 2009-10 is that if the BNP leader, Khaleda Zia, she passes away, then there will be an ideological vacuum in the opposition. And the BNP, which is largely a loose confederated party, will be actually flocking towards the Jamaat-e-Islami, because there are two ideological parties. One is the Secular Nations Awami League, and one is the Islamist party, the Jamaat. So I think the question will be valid whether in the next few years, if there is no Khaleda Zia and the BNP will be completely collapsing, what the Jamaat will do, it will have to then take a change of position from its currently relatively more regressive positions to accommodate all sort of BNP kind of supporters. Okay. But certainly in terms of their ideological views on women and homosexuals, to the secularists, to the atheists, I think it's quite regressive as of now.
It's quite, and just Philip Berman asked a question that you just referred to, the links between the opposition BNP and Jamaat.
Yeah, I think that's a very significant thing, because now what is in the last few months, what is interesting is happening is the Jamaat has become a loner. So although it has previous links with BNP, now it seems that the BNP is not quite much close to the Jamaat. The Jamaat is doing their events separately, and the BNP and the very small left parties are coming together in opposition to the Awami Leagues. So that's quite interesting. Whether how this relationship between the BNP and Jamaat pans out in future. But it is also possible that the Jamaat may in the long run, Jamaat may actually go towards the BNP, because you don't have choice. And as I pointed out in my previous presentation, that the two things are important. One is whether there will be a caretaker government and Jamaat is going to become a party in the elections in the name, an alternative name like Bangladesh Democratic Party is something which has, because they did in 1979 like the Islamic Democratic League, so it has a precedent.
Okay, I have to jump in there, because we're just doing a round to encapsulate the debate. But thank you very much for that. But Mohammed, Sinan, Siyech, is the resurgence of Jamaat good or bad for Bangladesh?
I think that answer, and like Dr. Maidul Islam pointed out as well, it's a very complicated question. I'd be very scared to give an immediate yes or no answer, right? I think the answer depends a lot in terms of what it is that we're looking at when you say good or bad, right? If you're talking about, yes, definitely, if you're talking about issues like liberal democracy and aspects of liberalism, right? Economy, and that is a different question altogether, because here it depends on how the opposition holds them to account as well. It depends also on, for example, the human rights records as well. It depends, for example, on how the US seems to be quite involved in ensuring that the democracy seems to be in place in Bangladesh. So will the US play a similar role in holding the Jamaat-e-Islam to check as well? And does that have a similar amount of influence? All these aspects can significantly influence the way the Jamaat-e-Islam would play a role if it would come to government, or if it would at any point play a role in the policy making of Bangladesh. So like my answer in short, it depends completely on all the other actors that are involved.
On the fence. Dr. Shafi Mostofa, I'm going to repeat the question. The resurgence of Jamaat, if it happens, good or bad for Bangladesh?
It's very difficult to give my judgment on that, but it depends very much on who is judging it.
Okay.
And definitely, if you put in place the liberal democracy to judge the resurgence of Jamaat-e-Islami, definitely it will be regressive.
It will be. So you do not agree with your colleague on the panel that that Islamic democracy is similar to Western democracy?
Truly speaking, honestly speaking, 100% it does not go with the liberal democracy. 100% not. But definitely, even no. While I'm saying that, I must say that even the no two democracies is monolithic. So
thank you very much for that. Because
can I just put one word on this the difference between the Islamic and the Western democracy? Very briefly. So one is that there's two important differences. One is that in the Islamic democracy you have the Sharia, which is the Islamic kind of law which will govern, which is made by something which is supernatural fact. Whereas in the Western democracy or any other kinds of forms, there is a man-made constitution is there. And the second, and the second is that what was the sovereignty of God versus the sovereignty of the people. So people is a much more secular category, whereas the God is a more secular. Otherwise, there's a very similar, like the direct form of elections, like presidential form of government with likes of caliphate, which is directly elected by the people. These are very similar.
Yes, and also these issues of God and the state is now sweeping through the United States and many other places. So it's not unique to Bangladesh. But now is the time to bring in the Democracy Forum chair, Barry Gardiner. He is a veteran. He knows these issues very well. He has been listening in. So Barry, sum up. What do you make of our discussion?
Humphrey, the first thing I would say is that clearly the time allocated is not enough, because I think everybody wanted to qualify, to say more, to continue the discussion. Okay. Allah Arain Chai Stot Lokar Shashan Chai. We want God's laws. We want honest people's rules. Well, who doesn't? Who doesn't? Okay, the trouble is, who interprets God's laws? Who is to say that this is God's laws? And it's about power and it's about control. And there is in all of the discussion that we've had this afternoon, we have the paradox of tolerance. Should intolerance be tolerated? Because one thing is sure, that if you really believe that you exclusively know what God's will is, and you believe that God wants you to implement his will through political means, then it becomes a sin not to do that. And therefore, you will have to be intolerant of anybody who disagrees with your view about what God's will is. And this is the paradox of intolerance or tolerance. It is the struggle that certainly the whole of the Western tradition has battled over with Christianity, eventually tried to resolve through the Enlightenment movement, and in my own country here, we had a Queen Elizabeth, not our latest Queen Elizabeth, but the first one, who eventually had to say, I do not seek to make a window into men's souls, and had to separate out the laws of human beings from the laws of God, and to leave religion into the private sphere of life, not the public one. So these are huge questions, but the fundamental goal of the Jamaat is the establishment of the Islamic way, al-Din, so as to achieve God's pleasure and seek salvation in the hereafter. It's to construct human thought in the light of the ideals, the values, the principles derived from divine guidance. These are part of the 5 steps that Jamaat sets out. So yes, we've gone back this afternoon into the history of the party, the founder of the Islamist movement here with Madadi, and the way in which in pre-independence India in 1941, it was this Islamic revival movement. Very interesting to hear the differing views about what was thought by Madadi at that time about whether India should be partitioned or not, and this idea that eventually the Ummah would outnumber the rest, and therefore it was a bad idea. we've been through the role that Jamaat played in the Bangladesh War of Liberation, the War of Independence, and how they sided with what is now the Pakistan Army in their efforts to push down the freedom fighters of Bangladesh during the 71 war. So you had the East Pakistan Central Peace Committee, which was a vital part of the military operations against the Bengali nationalists. And the leader of Jamaat in that period was one of the founding members, that's Ghulam Azam, one of the founding members and top leaders of their Shanti committee. So it's understandable that following the victory in the war, some of those leaders were imprisoned. And of course, they were charged with collaborating. Well, they were collaborating with the Pakistan Army. This was a war of independence, but of course, they could equally paint the picture that they were remaining true to the state that they were at that stage part of. So lots of conflicting claims over the rights and wrongs of that. We saw what happened ultimately with the execution of leaders in 2013 and 2016 after the Awami League government set up the International Crimes Tribunal to investigate those abuses committed in the 71 War of Independence. But let's look at the electoral performance. Actually, its greatest success in terms of numbers of seats was back in 2001, winning 17 of the 300 seats in the parliament. That, though, was only 4.3% of the vote, and it made them the fourth largest party. I think thereafter, actually, their vote share in the next election, or it may have been the next one, went up, but the number of seats that they won went down. So since 2013, we've learnt this afternoon, the court ruling in Bangladesh High Court ruled that Jamaat party's registration as a political party was illegal. And that action that had started in 2009 with a petition filed claiming that the party's religious character breached the constitution, which states that Bangladesh is a secular country. In the 2018 election, on the 7th of December, the Election Commission issued a notification revoking the registration of the bill as a political party in compliance with the High Court order ahead of the elections that were held that year on December 30th. And the party sought to run its candidates as independents instead of under the umbrella of the BNP-led alliance of parties that were opposed to the Awami League. So the next elections are in January 2024. And we know that in July 2020, the Dhaka Tribune reported that the Jamaat was forming a new party with a new constitution to get round the fact that its registration was blocked by the Electoral Commission. It also hoped to move beyond the issues of the 71 war, which have obviously limited the party's appeal. And the Dhaka Tribune reported that it had yet to choose a new name for the party. But in May 2020, it was reported that former leaders had formed a new party called the Amar Bangladesh Party. In June of this year, the Dhaka Tribune said that the ABP has denounced Jamaat's role during the Liberation War of 71. And the ABP leaders said their party believes in religious freedom for everyone. So the Tribune reported they'd applied to the Electoral Commission for registration as a political party, but it was yet to be approved. And there's been a recent challenge to reverse the ban just a few days ago, a couple of days ago, on the 12th of November. It was reported that the High Court held a hearing after the bill filed a petition to challenge the 2013 ruling. And the hearing's now been adjourned until the 19th of November. So maybe we'll get a ruling soon. Maybe it will affect the elections. But look, ultimately, Islam has not gone through the same trauma that the Christian faith went through and that Western countries went through. And we've heard today very eloquently about the progressive nature, the way in which Jamaat has actually won people's hearts by focusing on education, by focusing on training, by making sure that it is actually providing the necessities of life to people. All sounds wonderful, but we've also found about the infiltration of the civil service, of the infrastructure. And of course, the question is this: ultimately, if through democratic means an Islamist party gains power, does it then become intolerant? Does it then become anti-democratic and refuse to allow anybody else in the future to replace it? And this afternoon, we've had completely differing answers to that question. Some of our speakers have said, it's a progressive party. It will not take us backwards. Others have said, no, it's a regressive party. It will take us backwards. Fundamentally, it's a question of the paradox of tolerance. Can tolerance tolerate intolerance, and vice versa? Thanks very much.
Barry, thank you for that perspective that widened the debate. And yes, we did need more time. Thank you, panelists, Shafi Mostofa, Mohammed, Sinan, Siyech, Maidul Islam, and Mohammed Nazrul Islam, and Lord Charles Bruce for giving us that platform from which to debate, and to our audience for your questions and comments, and a couple of late ones coming in. Very interesting. Mr. Humphrey, why is a democracy particular to a region has to be Western? Can we not have a particular system manifesting our own reality? Yes, a very good point. And on the support for the War of Independence or against it, please think why the British government acted against the IRA, then you would understand why Jamaat-e-Islami acted to the territorial integrity of Pakistan. Yes, very good points there. Obviously, a lot more to debate. And our next Democracy Forum is at 2 p.m. London time on Wednesday, November the 29th. As Lord Charles Bruce said, we are expanding now to 2 a month. That's 2 o'clock to 3:30 p.m. Why China's Belt and Road Initiative has failed to take off in Nepal. And then on Wednesday, December the 13th, at 2 o'clock to 3:30 again, Central Asia and China, a new dependency is the debate. Read our sister magazine, Asian Affairs, that drills down more on the issues that we are discussing and carries a summary of this debate, covering many stories that you will not see in the mainstream media. But until next time, from me, Humphrey Hawksley, and all at the Democracy Forum, thank you and goodbye.
Bye.